When you say that the Bible is the only source of authority, you are in fact undermining the Bible's authority, because the Bible says to hold on to oral tradition and submit to those in authority, priests, neither of which you are doing when you claim that the Bible is the only source you recognize as authoritative. Anyone that does not hate what his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters stand for, if they're not also one of my cross-bearing disciples, is not worthy of me. If it wasn't for the authority of the church and tradition, we wouldn't even know what books are supposed to be in the Bible. So how can it be claimed that the Bible is the only source of authority? Sola Scriptura. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Muslims, where in your blood sacrifice so you can be forgiven? Infidel blood doesn't count, since it is not without blemish. The reason I read the Bible allegorically is because I don't believe in physical miracles. If I didn't read it allegorically, I would have no other choice but to come to the conclusion that miracles supposedly done by Jesus were only included as a means to sell people on the belief that Jesus is God incarnate. Nearly every person you ask says they believe Jesus is who he is because of the things he could do. Without the so-called miracles to back up the claim, it would have been nearly impossible to convince people. The thought that they were only included in the Bible as a means to trick people into believing in Jesus is more than my little brain can handle. Therefore, I look at them allegorically, which allows me to believe in Jesus as much as the next guy without having to deal with the quandary of thinking that charlatanism was used by the writers of the Bible to get others to believe. How many times a day do you tell God your Father that you love him? Saying it 3 times a day, which I know most of you don't, is only about 1,000 times a year. Which is not really enough, since he deserves to be told it 1,000 times a day. Since we can't very well do that and still expect to function on a daily basis, I propose that we all try and do it at least 35 times a day. God should hear that he is loved at least 7 billion times a day, since there are 7 billion people on this planet. However, since most people aren't saying it, The rest of us need to pick up the slack. If 200 million people will commit to saying it 35 times a day, we can at least make sure God hears it the 7 billion times. Getting 400 million people saying it 35 times a day would be the equivalent of God hearing it day and night from everyone. A daily chorus of I love you, God. I love you, Yahweh. I love you, Allah. I love you, Father. I love you, Abba. I love you, Dad. I love you, Jesus, will fill God's heart with joy. I would like to fulfill the Jews' longing for a temple. It's pretty hard to accept the Muslim position that Jesus was never crucified, especially if you consider that the Old Testament is clear that a blood sacrifice is necessary for the forgiveness of sins, which is what the crucifixion of Jesus is meant to be for those of us who believe. Every Muslim should be asked why God would present an elaborate system of sacrificial offerings in the Bible if it wasn't supposed to be a shadow of what was to come. Muslims claim that there are a lot of contradictions in the Bible and that the Qur'an doesn't have contradictions. What I'd like to point out when they say that is that the Bible contains thousands upon thousands of facts, dates, places, names, etc. Therefore, it is understandable why some have been copied incorrectly. While the Quran is only about 1/4 of the size and hardly has any specific facts, which is why none of these same type of copying mistakes could have occurred. Although the one time they do mention specific times, it is in contradiction with itself. The Quran says there were 6 days, 4 days, and 2 days of creation. It's as if they purposely left out the facts so they wouldn't have to face the same type of problems with copying. Perhaps the reason there are no specific facts in the Quran, other than because the scribes left them out on purpose, is because Gabriel only spoke in generalities to Muhammad. Or perhaps Muhammad only remembered in general what Gabriel had told him. Or perhaps those that remembered every word Muhammad spoke couldn't remember the facts given to them.